Hi, this is Sean Hafer, and in this tutorial, we'll be continuing with our clock phase 2 in Cinema 4D. So in this tutorial, what we're going to do is create the tick marks around for the minutes around our clock face, and we'll also bring in some numbers from Illustrator to use those on the clock as well. So I'm going to go ahead and start by just creating a disk, and this will be the same size as the clock face from our previous tutorials, and 100 centimeters outer radius is great. And what I'll do is make that on the plus Z. And just to make it look a little rounder, let's give it a 96 in the rotation segments. All right, and we'll just name this disk, and call that clock face. And this will be a reference, and then we'll create a little texture map to pop on that later. So now what we can do is let's create some little tick marks around our clock. So I'm going to start with some splines here. So let's come in here and create a circle spline. And I'm going to make that radius 95. So it sits inside of our clock. And we can do this from our front view if we really want to see sort of what's going on. And then what I'll do is come into my circle, and we're going to turn this into a ring. All right, so we have two radiuses going on. So our outer radius is 95, and let's make our inner radius 94. All right, that seems good. And then what we want to do is make sure this looks smooth, right? Because we want this to be nice and curved. And we'll come in here, and in our intermediate ring points, uniform instead of 8, let's bring that up to 96. All right, that looks nice and smooth now. Perfect. Okay, so we've got that. Now I'm going to duplicate this by Command C or Control C and Command V, Control V, and we'll have a separate one. And in this one, let's bring our radius down to 90, and then our inner radius down to 89. Okay, that looks good. So that'll give us our two little bars. Now we're going to put our tick marks inside that area. So I'm going to come in next, create a rectangle spline. So under our splines menu, rectangle, and it's really big. So what we'll do is come in here and make that 1 centimeter wide. Let's try 5 centimeters tall. And let's see how that looks when we bring that up. Will that cross over both of those? I think it will. That should be good. Yep, we've got enough space there. So I'm going to undo that. So it's back at 0, 0, or just type in 0 down here. Hit apply or hit enter. Now that's back at the center. I'm going to go ahead and hide my clock face so we don't see all that. So what we're going to use now, we want to create 60 of these little tick marks around here for our minutes. But we don't want to copy and paste and rotate and do all that. So we're going to use a cloner. So cloners are up here in MoGraph, and then hit cloner. And what that does is it duplicates objects, and there's many different ways, and we'll get into cloners a lot in later tutorials for sure. But in this case, we're going to use a radial cloner. So I'm going to drag my rectangle into it, click on my cloner, and instead of grid array for mode, I want to go radial. Now you'll see what's happening here is it's doing a radial, and if we look at our 4 views, it's doing a radial from the top, right? So it's coming around that way. So what we want to do, instead of having that radial happen on the XZ, we want it to be on the XY, right? And now we can see those are going around in the right way in our front view. And we want there to be 60 of them. So instead of 5, let's make it 60. So now what we can do is come into our cloner, and where this radius is at 50, let's drag that out to 92. I think that looks good. Let's make sure these are all crossing over each other. That looks great. And now we've got our rectangles, we've got our two circles, and all of those are doing their thing. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to group those together. So let's shift select all of them or marquee select them, however you want to do it. You can do that as well. And then you can right click and go down here to group objects. Or you can also use Option or Alt G. And that'll give us a null and then put all of our objects inside of it. So I'm going to take this and call it ticks. Now what we want to do, let's do an extrude like we did with the hands. We'll create this extrude object, drag our ticks into it, and we should get our ticks going back, but we're not getting anything. The reason is on an extrude, if you've got multiple objects grouped together, we want to check this box called hierarchical. So if I check that, now it'll look into this entire folder and extrude everything in there. So if I zoom in now, we can see how that looks. Looks nice and smooth. We can make this, take this down to maybe 1. So we just have a little thickness and go from there. Now, if you wanted to play with some bevels on here, remember that's in our caps. Come in here, bevel shape, round. Add a little bit there just to catch the light. And if you want to crank up the segments, that's fine. Let's see how that looks. Good. I think it looks pretty good. And so we've got enough segments. This feels pretty round. And so we're in good shape. And I'm going to hit O and center that up. We can turn our clock face back on just to see it. And we can do a quick little render. Now, if you're rendering and checking things before you create all your lights and all of that stuff, one way to sort of get the illusion of some shadows is to use ambient occlusion. And what I'm going to do is just go into my render settings here and click on Effect. And the first one up here is called Ambient Occlusion. And we can use it just at its default, but this simulates the contact shadows that happen when things are near each other. So we can come in here, close that. Now if I click and record, you can see I've got some more definition without using lights and shadows. So I can really see how that's starting to come together. It looks pretty good. All right. So now let's bring in our numbers. So what I want to do is go up to File, Merge Project, and I'm going to grab from that same Clock Round 2 folder, Clock Numbers. Again, this is an Illustrator file, saved as Illustrator 8. We'll do Connect Splines, and when that comes in, we now have our clock numbers. Okay, now these aren't centered, so the first thing to do, take that, come down to our coordinates manager and zero those out. So I'll go 0, tab 0, hit enter, and now we've got that centered up. Now if I come in, I can go ahead and just hit my T for scale and scale those out to where I think those look good. So give it a little space, and that feels pretty good. All right, so now I've got my clock numbers coming around. Same thing here. Let's just do an extrude. Now, instead of creating the extrude and dragging into it, if you've got something selected and you come up and hold down Option or Alt and click on your extrude, it'll automatically make whatever you had selected a child of that. So that's a little time saver. So we can come in here, we'll name this clock numbers. And while I'm thinking of it, let's come down here and make this tick marks. All right, and we can roll those up. And now, again, the same thing here. We're not going to get any extrusion until we do hierarchical. So let's click on our clock numbers, back to Object, and hit hierarchical. And there we go. Those guys are all extruding out. So what we want to do is make this 1. And that feels pretty good. So now if we do our little render with our ambient occlusion, we can see those are feeling pretty good. We could come in and play with, again, the bevel on our caps. So if I come in here and let's just say, let me go to display, grow chaining lines, and let's look at what we've got on our caps here. So in that clock numbers, we can do a step maybe. Let's bring that up. See how that feels? It's kind of dramatic. Maybe take it down to 0.5. And see how that feels. Make sure it's not messing up any of our little ones. Now our X's are a little tight. That seems okay. Let's see what it looks like. All right, that's pretty dramatic. Maybe bring those steps down to 1 and let's see how that feels. All right, so maybe I'll take that back to like a 0.2. I think that feels pretty good. So let's see one more time. Yeah, that looks really nice. So now we'll get a nice little edge there and we can grab what we're looking at. Okay, so we've got that. Now let's pull in a texture map for our face. So if we come in here, I've got to create a new material. I'm going to go into my color channel. I'm just going to double click it so it opens up in this window. Go to my color channel and click on these little ellipses here next to texture. Go back into my folder, clock round 2. And then here we have our clock face gradient. So I'm going to open that up. Now, again, if you want to put this into your folder with your textures and all that, you can do that. But I'm going to say no. Bring it in. And I probably will just leave that as the default. And let's drag that onto our clock face and give that a little render. All right. So now what happened is this went on backwards. All right. So because that plane is just 1 pixel thick. So what I want to do is in my clock face plane, or I'm sorry, disk, I'm going to go ahead and go -Z. And now that will reverse the way those polygons are facing. And now that will render correctly. Okay, great. So we've got that on there. And we've got our face of our clock. Now, one other cool thing we could do, let's come here and create a couple more materials. So I'm going to create a black material. So I'm going to come into my color and just bring that almost to black. And on my reflectance channel, again, by default, we've got this specular on here. And the specular is a fake. We don't really want to use that all the time, but if you don't have anything reflected around you, it's kind of a handy way to fake reflectance. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and bring that width down a little bit and bring that specular strength up to get a little tighter specular. All right, and so we've got that going on with our black. Now I'm going to go ahead and pull in a material from Maxon. Now, if we come up here in S24, they've created the asset browser in a different way. So we can come over here, just click on this, and you can come in and say, I want materials. And we want to let's find a metallic. Let's say there's metal. And now we can pull in here and just see if there's something, maybe gold, right? There's a gold. So if you click on the little cloud here, it'll download it. And now you can just drag that over into our scene and it'll give us a gold. So let's go ahead and close that. And what we can do is with the extrudes, we can limit where our materials go. So if I come up here and go to my clock numbers and I create black, right? So that's on here. So now we'll get those rendering black. We can also throw that on our tick marks. For that, I'm just going to hold down Command or Control and drag. You see a little plus happens, and it'll drag that same material tag down. And then what I want to look at is in our extrudes, we have some selections. So we could turn these on. So if I go to selections, I want to do that start cap. That's our front cap. And I want to go ahead and throw, actually not even that. Let's do our bevel, start bevel. And that's R1. And you can see it created a little material texture tag for me, a selection tag. So I'm going to bring my gold up here. Make sure your gold is to the right of the black texture. And then with that gold selected so that it opens up here in the attributes manager, you can see we've got a little selection area. And if I grab this and take that and bring it in, you can see now that gold is just applied to the bevel. So let me do a quick render. Okay, so I think what's happening is it's going to the rear bevels. Let me check that. And let me go back in here because I think, let's double check end bevel as well. So if we come down here, we select our gold. I believe the end bevel might be the direction this is coming. And there we go. We can see that now. That end bevel is here. And if I hit render, the gold is just on the bevels and the black is inside everything else. So the selection sets are built in. And again, to get to those, just remember, go to selections and you've got shell, start cap, end cap, start bevel, and end bevel. So if you wanted that to be a different color, you could do that. So now we've got that happening. And we've got our little bevel. If we hit render now, we've got some things. So now, but what's going on here is, let's look at this gold here that we've got. So with this gold material and with its reflective nature, we need something for it to reflect. So what I'm going to do here, and we've done this in other renderings, but just to see how this will look here, let's just check it real quick. And I'm going to go ahead and create a sky object. And again, let's go to our extensions. If I go into lighting, we'll see we have HDRI. So under templates and presets, lighting, HDRI, and then we can grab one of these and bring it in. So I'm just going to maybe download this sunny whatever. And let's bring that in. And now if we come back here, close that up, we've got our sky object. Let's drag that onto our sky. Now we'll see it everywhere. Let's go ahead and do a quick render. Now we can see our gold has some things to reflect. So it looks a little cleaner, a little closer. So, and again, if we don't want to see that sky in our render, we can come in here, go to tags, render tags, compositing. And then on the sky, just uncheck seen by camera. Now when we hit render, it will be reflected in our reflective materials, but we won't see it in our scene. So that's a way to go about that. All right. Well, in our next tutorial, we'll be creating a different type of top handle utilizing a sweep and a lathe object. So I'll see you in that tutorial, and thanks for watching.